Welcome back to America's Forum. Former Congressman and Colonel Alan West hanging in with us. J.D. Hayworth, John Bogman, and pretty soon a visitor from Washington to talk about some very important topics, John.
Power-packed segment here, and we'll get right to it right now, talking about Obamacare. Enrollment for Obamacare has come and gone, but that doesn't mean all is well with the new law. There are still a ton of questions. First, how many people have actually followed through and received their policies, and how many folks have actually paid those premiums? Also, how much will premiums skyrocket in 2015 when the insurance companies won't have as much incentive to compete for customers? And then there's the reality of today. According to new surveying information, the average price for insurance renewals has increased over 11% in the small group market and 12% in the individual market already. Now, in some states, that's increased to 10 to 15 or 50 times those averages. Of course, the law hugely unpopular with the majority of Americans right now. Still a lot of questions that we talked about, and Republicans feel the unpopularity of the law right now is still really their best chance to open up that door and ensure a victory in the midterm elections, particularly in the Senate, where they want to gain control.
Oh yes, it's up for grabs in the Senate, but will that be easy? Joining us now via Skype, the senator from Utah, Mike Lee. Senator Lee recently wrote an op-ed that warned Republicans have to find their own solutions to the health care crisis or perhaps face disappointment in November. Senator Mike Lee, we really appreciate your time and we welcome you to America's Forum.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
Now, Mike, the op-ed you recently co-authored in the Washington Examiner, in that piece you called President Obama on the carpet for what you say are blatant lies about the Affordable Care Act. Do you want to enumerate those blatant untruths?
Well, most importantly, the president's been going around claiming that we've added 7 million insured Americans to the ranks of the insured with this law. The problem with that is that both Goldman Sachs and McKinsey and Company, looking into the data, have concluded that it's actually less than 1 million people who can be described as both uninsured before this year and people who have now enrolled and started paying premiums. So if he's going to throw out numbers like that, he needs to explain what the numbers actually mean. And what he's instead doing are repeating those numbers in a way that's really quite misleading to the American people. It makes it sound like this law is a success, when in fact it has cost Americans a lot of money. It's cost a lot of Americans jobs. It's cost a lot of Americans access to healthcare providers, insurance companies, doctors that they have come to trust over the years. And it's making health insurance more expensive rather than less. All of this is happening at the same time that we're not seeing a dramatic increase in the number of people who are getting insured for the first time.
Now, Senator, you talk about the need for a Republican alternative to Obamacare right now, but when we ask that question many times, the answer normally you get from a lot of conservatives is that there's no one really to lead the party right now like the Democrats have in the Oval Office to really put forth this plan. But do you think the GOP really is missing an opportunity here right now without having, there are lots of ideas out there, but there's no central plan, if you will, maybe not even an omnibus bill, but a central step forward, a way to move ahead for the party?
Yeah, I've said in the past that I think there will come a time when Republicans will need to unite behind a single healthcare reform.
But wouldn't you say that time is now, though, that it's really needed right now in these midterm elections when Obamacare is polling so poorly with the public right now?
Well, what I mean by this is that there will come a time when we need to unite behind one bill, but right now we don't need one bill, we need 10. And those 10 need to compete in the marketplace of ideas in a way that Obamacare never did. And the time will come, hopefully sometime this year or next, when Republicans will be able to unite behind a single plan. But like I say, right now we don't need one plan, we need 10. Now, several of us have offered reforms, things that could replace Obamacare. I offered one last year in connection with my Saving the American Dream plan. Plans, including one that was designed by the House Republican Study Committee. Senators Burr, Coburn, and Hatch are working on another. There are several others that are percolating up. Paul Ryan has been working on the issue. And I welcome more and more debate and discussion around this, because what we need is a reform measure that we can all coalesce behind that will allow people to carry their insurance policy with them when they move from state to state, when they move from job to job. And we need to do this through a series of incentives involving the tax code Some of them would call for tax deductions, others would call for tax credits. But one way or another, we can get there. But we need to do it in such a way that leaves Americans in charge of their own healthcare decisions, rather than having those decisions made for them by government bureaucrats in Washington.
Hey, Senator Allen West here. How are you doing?
Doing great, Colonel. How are you?
Fantastic. You know, today we just heard that, once again, we got another delay or an exemption, whatever you want to call it, from the president. And that when you look at the Medicare Advantage cuts that were going to happen, he's going to delay that. And then also you just had recently a voice vote that happened in the House about the high deductibles, giving more options to small businesses. When we look at this thing, the Affordable Care Act, can we actually truly say that it is the law of the land? Because it's definitely not resembling anything like what was passed back in 2010.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, look, it resembles how it's been in the very beginning, almost not at all. I mean, we were promised the sun, the moon, and the stars. What was in fact passed in 2010 was a lot less appetizing, to say the very least, to put it really, really mildly, than how they pitched this thing. But now what we have, as you described, is something that has evolved into something very different than even what was enacted into law in March of 2010. We have the president changing this law dozens and dozens of times by the stroke of the executive pen, even though he doesn't have the authority to do that. You have the Supreme Court that rewrote the law not just once, but twice in order to save it from an otherwise inevitable finding of unconstitutionality. That too is wrong. The American people are starting to recognize the fact that they're being hurt by this law, and that this law has caused them to become the victims of various constitutional violations.
Hey, Mike, we need to change topics because we want to get into, you've just been prolific on the opinion pages. Yet another op-ed, this one dealing with crony capitalism. There in Washington, D.C., what do you think typifies the worst example of crony capitalism, and what needs to be done?
Okay, so one of the most obvious examples, one of the examples that most Americans would think of immediately when they're asked about crony capitalism would be Solyndra. The government chooses a favorite within a particular industry that is itself a favorite among industries. And the government then agrees to absorb the risk associated with that business enterprise. This is the worst kind of example of sort of the elite, those in the top 1%, climbing up the ladder and then pulling up the ladder from behind them so as to make it more difficult for other Americans to climb the ladder, and doing so with the help of government. Government which ends up getting involved in the marketplace and then choking out competition and innovation. So Solyndra is one example of that. Another example that I mentioned in my op-ed is the Export-Import Bank, through which the government backstops loans that really involve a relatively narrow window of America.
And Mike, we're going to have to leave it there, but I will tell you as we head out of this, we thank you for your time. And during my days in the House, I was fighting that XM Bank too. So we appreciate you picking up that mantle and taking on the Export-Import Bank, the whole idea of picking winners and losers. We look forward to having you back, Senator Mike Lee. Thanks for your input today on America's Forum.
Yeah, both those op-eds worth checking out to get the senator's take on those two situations, and interesting, especially in light of the 2014 midterms.
Coming up, the search for the black box intensifies for that Malaysian jetliner. Stay tuned.